Welcome to Real Talk, where I give real answers to real questions from real worship leaders. If you are a real worship leader with a real question and you want a real answer, head right here and submit your question for a future episode. Got some good questions this week. Let's talk about it. I'm a beginner worship leader, less than 2 years experience, and was just hired by a small rural church, averaging 100 people. I'm constantly approached by people who are not praise team members but want to sing special music during Sunday morning service. I've spoken with the pastor about his policies, but he mostly tells me that as long as they don't sound awful, it's up to me as the worship leader. My main focus is that whoever performs on stage isn't doing it for their own praise or platform, but for God's glory and edification of the church. How would you advise maneuvering through these conversations in a loving way, but also protects the integrity of worship? As you know, you probably heard, I've talked about special music on this channel before, and so I've got to start off by saying that I'm biased in that I don't use special music in my church. I don't think that it serves a function in what we are trying to do when we gather together as a church. I think that when we gather together as a church, our purpose is to sing together, that we are to teach and admonish one another, singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with thankfulness in our hearts to God. We're supposed to teach and admonish one another, that as everybody participates in the singing, that we teach and admonish one another. And so worship is not supposed to be something that is a spectator sport in any capacity. It's not like I'm listening to somebody sing and then what happens after they sing? We clap, right? Wow, you did a really good job today. You did a really good job singing that song, or you did a really good job playing the piano. What are we supposed to do when we gather together? We are gathered together to glorify God and edify each other. And we're all doing it together when we're singing, teaching and admonishing one another, speaking in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to one another. And so that's like my biblical case for why I don't necessarily like special music. You could point to 1 Corinthians 14 where it says everybody has a psalm to share, among other things, to share with the church. I think whenever it's talking about that, it's not talking like, first of all, it's talking about a psalm, which is scripture. It's not talking about like, hey, this person had a song that they were going to sing. It's like this person was going to sing a psalm out of the Bible, because much of the worship of the early church, especially when this was back in 50 AD or something, the 50s AD, when Paul was writing to the Corinthians, much of the worship of the early Christian church actually was like a form of the synagogue worship of the Jews. And what would the Jews do in the synagogue? They would sing psalms together. So that's why it's saying you have a psalm, and there might have been a cantor, like one person leading the psalm, but then the whole congregation would respond by saying hallelujah or something like that. That's how the synagogue worship worked, and then that slowly transformed into the early Christian church, how they would worship, and then it's transformed since then. But my point is, all throughout the worship, because we don't just have priests performing for us, whether that is the Old Testament worship, whether that is Catholic worship, whatever it is, whether that is special music, whatever it is, we don't have somebody performing for us. We are all worshiping God because we are all a royal priesthood. And you could even go to, for example, the Reformers and Martin Luther's recovery of the singing of the church being returned to the people, and not just watching a priest sing and perform priestly duties before God. This happened during the Reformation. This is why we sing today, or part of the reason that we sing today, also because it's biblically based, but because Martin Luther was part of recovering congregational singing. And it has been a blessing to us because it helps us to teach and admonish one another, and we praise God while we're doing it. It like fulfills both pieces, and it's not just a performance. So those are my thoughts on special music. So if I don't think I've ever fully explained that on here. But here's what I would say. You're coming into a new church, and we need to be mindful as we come into the new church that we aren't just going to tear everything down instantly. Of course, there's going to be changes that we want to make. But I don't think that special music in and of itself is one of those things that you just rip and tear down. If it is like, it sounds like it's like a very big deal in your church. So what do? you raise up people's understanding of what biblical worship can look like and the benefits thereof of that way of worshiping God. And in the end, they will no longer desire special music because they will see a better way to worship God. And I'm not saying that like special music is the most horrible thing in the world. I'm not saying you're a horrible person if you have special music in your church. I could see a case where you would use that. Probably not on a weekly basis, but maybe occasionally you have somebody sing a song for the edification of your church. It's just not something that I want to regularly happen in my church because I think that there are more beneficial ways to glorify God and edify the people in my church as we all sing together. So, teach your church what you believe about worship, and it has to happen slowly over time. And then you can explain to your church when somebody comes up and says to you, I really want to sing this piece for special music. I would explain to them, when we get together, I really believe, and this is the way that I've been trying to plan worship, is that we gather together to glorify God and to edify each other. And Colossians 3:16 says, teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Ephesians 5:18 through 20 says, do not be drunk on wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. So I really try to use that as the basis for our music in our services, that we would all be speaking to one another. Why do we do that? Because in that we can teach each other through the songs that we're singing, but we also do it with thankfulness in our hearts to God. And we all get to participate in the act of praising God together. So I would explain something like that to somebody if they were really pushing back on, well, I don't understand why we can't have special music in our church. I would just explain it that way. And then the last thing that I wanted to address in this question is that it seems like your pastor is just abdicating responsibility to you. I don't believe that the pastor just hands over the responsibility of how things are done on a Sunday morning to the worship leader and say, hey, whatever you think is best, go for it. What we have to understand is that the Sunday morning gathering is one of the key discipling pieces for the people in our church. And so if our pastor wants to just hand that over to somebody else, I think they're missing on a huge discipling piece for the people of their church. Our corporate worship gatherings are fundamental to our development as Christians. This is why Hebrews says don't forgo meeting together. Don't give up on meeting together. Why? Because we want to encourage one another as the day is drawing near. As the day draws near, we constantly gather together with the community of believers to be reminded of the truth of Christ, which sustains us and transforms us into the image of Christ through the preaching of the word and through the rehearsing of the gospel story until we arrive at our final destination. Sunday gatherings are a gift from God for the development of his people and the sustaining of his people as they walk through the earthly kingdom with their eyes set on the heavenly kingdom, knowing that they are heavenly citizens. Their citizenship is in heaven. They are constantly reminded of that as they gather together, and that forms them as they seek to live a life that is worthy of God. And that to say, well, worship leader, you just do whatever. It abdicates the discipleship process, the formation of God's people from the pastor is my view. Like that is the role of the pastor, is to shepherd the flock and help them work through that process. And one of the main ways that they work through that process is by helping facilitate the Sunday morning gathering. You guys work together to figure that out. So you and your pastor need to be on the same page, not just, well, Spencer, do whatever you want. Whatever you do is good. Like, no, I want your opinion on this because I want to know what's best for the people of this church. Hey, Spencer, I've been watching your videos for the past 2 years, and I appreciate what you do. I've been a worship pastor for over 10 years and have served part-time for the past 4 years at an older, smaller Baptist church, under 100 on Sundays. I lead a team of 12 people including 5 singers, 4 musicians, and 3 tech volunteers. A typical Sunday consists of 2 guitars, bass, drums, and 3 singers. I also use the Carl Vercade pads to fill in the mids. Thanks for the tip. When I started in this role, I had a very challenging pianist who would never show up prepared, played their version of the songs instead of what the band was playing, and overall created tension and frustration. They would even go to the senior pastor, as I always include him in the emails, to ask him to print their music out each week instead of keeping any of the music from previous weeks like the rest of the team. I approached the senior pastor several times and asked him not to enable this person to no avail. The person ended up leaving to play at a different local church after I informed them that I wouldn't allow them to play at both churches every Sunday. They returned around 7 months later to our church, but never asked to join the worship team until this past Sunday. They originally left around 2 years ago, and in that time I had also asked for the pastor and other leaders to remove their name from the worship team list, which is used for internal business purposes, to which I was told no. The pastor wants this person on the list so that they can play piano anytime I'm sick or on vacation. This person is also the stewardship team lead now and has influence in the church. I try to respect the pastor and leaders in the church, but I don't feel like I'm able to truly lead my ministry. Anyway, my question is, what should I do regarding this person wanting to join the team again? I'm not a big fan of them coming back, but I also want to go to my team and see what they think first. I'm honestly just afraid that they'll say, sure, give them another chance. I've also considered allowing them to join with stipulations, but as I've already informed you, the person was able to go directly to the pastor before, and he allowed and even encouraged their poor behavior. Thanks, Spencer. I appreciate your time and help. Well, that sounds like a very frustrating situation, and above the problem of this piano player on your team, the real problem is that you and your pastor are not on the same page. You and your pastor need to be on the same page, and it can go one of 2 ways. Either you have a serious conversation with your pastor about this person and lay out all of the things that you've just told me, which it sounds like you've already done, and you lay it out like, this is really frustrating for me when these things happen, and we need to be on the same page. So I can't have this person going above me. And by the way, that's like a problem with the pastor when somebody tries to, so let's say your pastor is at the top of the pyramid, so to speak. I know that can be a dangerous way to put it, but we'll put it that way for now. And you're under here, right? And you're under them. And the person on your worship team's down here in terms of leadership structure, and they jump over you to get around your leadership, and they go to your pastor, and your pastor supports them. That's a problem with your pastor and the leadership structure of your church. That should not be happening. Your pastor should be saying, that's a worship team decision, and so you need to talk to the worship team leader about that. That's not an expectation that's unreasonable for you to have. I just want to tell you that. That would make me very frustrated if somebody kept going above me and then whatever happened was passed down to me and I didn't have the ability to make decisions that needed to be made in my ministry. So that is ultimately what you've got to focus on, or you're going to find this cropping up in other areas as well. And you need to have a talk with your pastor about that, not just like, I feel like this person shouldn't be on the team. And I think you even said, you've had conversations like this in the past. I would just ask you, is this happening in other areas as well? Because it seems to me like it probably is. That's not usually just, a one-time thing. That's like, this is how the structure is in the church. And so that's one thing that can happen. You can either tell your pastor that and they're like, okay, I was wrong. Or maybe your pastor's seeing something that I'm not seeing, that you're not seeing, and there's a reason that they want this person on the team, and they need to explain that to you, and then you submit to your pastor's leadership because this is what's best for the church. I know you don't see that right now. I don't see that in the situation that you explained, but maybe there's something that we're missing. But you've got to talk to your pastor about this before you even consider the keyboardist question, the piano player question. Now, let's say we get that figured out, which is what needs to be figured out first. Either you're going to submit to your pastor's leading in this area in the church, and I'm not saying that that's going to be easy, especially with the situation that you described. Either that happens, or you convince your pastor that something needs to change. And to me, hopefully it sounds like the second one, that you convince your pastor that things need to change in terms of leadership structure there, or understanding the leadership structure. Let's say you've got that solved, whatever happens there. What would I do for this person who comes back on my team? It sounds like they know that they've been a nuisance in the past and things haven't worked out. Before they join your team, you've got to have a conversation with them and say, hey, whatever decision you make, one of those decisions could be, hey, I'm glad you're back. I'm willing to give it another shot with having you on the team, but, we worked through some difficulties before, and we really need to keep an eye on those things, right? So when I give you the music, this is how we do things on our team. I give you the music, and then you keep the music, which I don't know. I don't really care about that much, to be honest. Like, I just tell them, if you need your music again, have me print it out. I don't know. That seems like a surface level issue. But if they're like causing problems in your team, one of those things being they're just going to play whatever they want to play, then that's a conversation that you need to have and say, we've got these specific arrangements that we do. This is how we work together as a team. And as you come into the team, I need you to fit into how we do things. And I understand that that's going to take a little time, but we need to work together to figure out how you fit into the team. Because, and I assume that you can reference back to a conversation you've had in the past, because before we've had this problem of, you're not meshing with the team, you're just playing whatever you want to play. Like, we need to work cohesively as a team. So I'm going to be focused on that. And we're going to pay attention to that together and work towards that together. You got to have these conversations up front. And then if it doesn't work out, then you've had the conversations up front, and it sounds like you need the support from your pastor, but this is why we talked to our pastor in the first place. Either you're going to submit to your pastor's vision for the church, which, there's not anything necessarily wrong with that. I know it's frustrating. You keep talking to your pastor, but like, if this person always goes over your head to your pastor, there's probably a bigger problem in your church if your pastor allows that to happen over and over again. So you need to talk to your pastor and figure it out. I don't know what else to say in that situation. I'm trying to get to the root of the issue, and the root of the issue is not just the keyboardist. I won't keep repeating myself. Now, if you want help setting expectations for new worship team members, whether it's this keyboardist or somebody else joining your team, I put together the Worship Team Toolkit, which I'll link down in the description below. In that toolkit, I will give you the code of conduct that I use for my worship ministry. You can pretty much plug and play it right into your worship ministry, copy and paste it, use it tomorrow, hand it to a new worship team member. And I also have my worship team application form that I have people fill out before they join the team. This might be a good thing to have this keyboard player do. You have them fill that out, and it outlines all of your expectations for not just them, but for any worship team member. And then you can point back to those expectations and have conversations about them in the future because you outlined it before they join the team. So if you need help setting up something like that for your worship team, check that out down in the description below, the Worship Team Toolkit. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.